Share my screen. All right. Thank you, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Thank you for joining with us today. Today we have a great session today for sure. We have Vlad, the director of our enablement series and other elements that Vlad is working with. So before we can start, there are some housekeeping rules. During the session, you can use a leverage chat box. Post-session, if you have any questions you want to ask to the speaker or organizers, you can use this, scan the QR code for a Google form, and then you can post a question to our speakers or organizers. We have our recording sessions I've been uploading on every day. Yesterday's session I've not yet uploaded. I'm going to do it by end of this today. And you could scan the QR code for our upcoming sessions for a more session that you would like to interest. So I would request to attend some more sessions to understand the product overview and the product capabilities. So it's a great bootcamp for scheduling for everyone who start their career, and which are covering entire across spaces this marketing cloud. So today our session 2, which is CDP, a data cloud now. So we have a Salesforce data cloud. Yesterday we announced the CDP renaming as to move to Salesforce data cloud. And today we have session data cloud discovery checklist and framework, introductions, and after that we can go through the topic and resources, Q&A, and we can talk about what is the next session and when is the next session, right? And we have our organizing team. Thanks to all the organizers who put a lot of efforts on this engagement and the bootcamp. I would personally thank Abhishek, Vishal, Prashant, and myself. And without any delay, I'm going to hand it over to Vlad. Vlad, thank you so much again for taking your time and sharing your knowledge with our audience. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, hold on, just want to make sure. Okay, can you still hear me okay?
Absolutely. Okay, very clear.
Perfect, that's very good. All right, so let me just get into my sharing of the screen. I'm just doing one last minute quick change, so bear with me for just a quick second, and we'll start in a minute. So just thought about something in the right before the session, and just want to make it and incorporate it. So, well, first of all, if you don't know me, as Fanny said, my name is Vlad Salek. I'm with Salesforce. I've been with Salesforce for almost 10 years now. And by sort of quick introduction, I guess here is to say I've been working on the marketing product portfolio for quite a long time, and more recently, I'm kind of working in the data cloud, or what used to be CDP and a few other names. This is where my area, I guess, of expertise for the last few years have been laying out. And today I'm going to be gladly sharing with you, as Fanny said, the topic around the discovery and how to approach overall planning and design for an implementation. So give me a second. For some reason, my deck just closed up. Let me just restart that. Apologies for this technical thing. Sometimes with Google Slides, they get a bit bloated and it takes a while for them to start. So let's see if I just restart that. Hopefully.
Sure, Vlad. So apparently we have so many questions, Vlad, for today's session. So with the recent changes with the naming, it's been 5 times the name has been changed from Customer 360 to Audiences, next to CDP, next to Customer Data Platform, next Data Cloud. So of course, our audience also has plenty of questions. So I would really love to see your responses as well. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's something that I can definitely talk about. And one of the things I do want to say is, the change, personally, I feel it's a great thing that we're doing right now. Look into different reasons and different kind of like approaches to do that, but more than happy to talk in depth if we need to. All right, so the screen should be in. I'm gonna kick it off and hopefully the presentation will move forward. If not, I'll just make it forward. All right, that's good. So thank you once again for taking your time, spending it with us, learning something new, something interesting, and I'm sure I will try to excite you as a reward for investment of your time. So the plan for me for today is to walk you through a little bit an overview of the implementation flow. The reason I do that is hopefully will become a bit more obvious as we get to the point, but essentially it's just to kind of help you understand what are we trying to discover in the first place. So we're going to touch through how it's been sort of configured, how the solution is being done, and then that hopefully will make it a bit easier to understand how the discovery needs to be sort of undertaken. Then we'll look into the framework. We'll look into some of the things that you need to specifically focus on as you're going up through the discovery, and then move on to the questions and live discussions. So without any further ado, I'll just jump into the implementation journey. Now, the interesting point that we were kind of considering as a part of our education for consulting partners, and something that we seem to be sort of facing more and more, is with implementation specifically around, and I'm going to refer within the presentation as data cloud. If you still used to the name of CDP, that's fine. It's one and the same essentially, but we'll get to that. But I'll just consistently try to use the new name. So we'll kind of move towards the new name. So with the implementation of data solutions, I even put it this way, as well as any other solutions, it's super important to think about the process as an entire entity. So from very start to very end. And an interesting analysis is if you look at the focus on technology and you start looking how technology applies within the organization, how it changes and influences people in terms of how they do their jobs, how it improves and changes and optimizes the processes, and obviously driving the outcomes. It's a really good approach. It's solid. You're looking at the feature functions, you've got capabilities in play, and you're now putting them forward into sort of delivering the outcome. Now, when we start looking into how the consultancy is done a lot of the times on our products within Salesforce, we realize that the great outcome can be driven if you start looking into the outcomes first. So we're looking into what are we trying to deliver for the customers, why we're doing that, and then we start doing kind of like the same flow. So we're applying technology to see how it can benefit customers, how it can change and evolve their processes, as well as influence people on their own. And it drives much better long-term success. We've seen much better sort of realization of value from the investment. We've seen people adopting products and solutions better and faster, and therefore it kind of builds up that culture of continuous innovation. It empowers customers to be the owners of the solution. And obviously, if you are implementing it yourself for yourself in the future, or your customers as a consultant, that's something to keep in mind. In my opinion, this is number one step. You need to think through what are the reasons of what we're doing here before you start doing anything. From the implementation flow and guide, I guess I took that screenshot of our documentation that talks about, when you go into the data cloud on Salesforce Help, you will see these different sort of sections. That's the way we break down the flow, and it sort of gets, getting started with the platform, so you get to understand and learn a little bit about that, and then you start going up through all of these different stages and steps. What is interesting for me here, number one, is we do want to kind of build up the awareness before you start what the product is and what it does. And that's something that we sort of doing through this series of bootcamp sessions. But what is interesting is the second step is actually about planning the data strategy. And I did bring it up purposely here, is just to ensure that you understand is when you're coming up into discovery, discovery itself can be done in a few different stages. If you're implementing for yourself, or if you're implementing for a customer, then the way to look at the first discovery would be to identify where does the data product fits into the organization. So what are the different business cases, scenarios, use cases that we're trying to evaluate in order to see if the data cloud in this case would be a good solution or part of the solution stack for the customer to implement that. And similar to that, so when you go up and look into any other products, you would be doing the exact same approach, where you go, what are we trying to do? What are the use cases that we're trying to unlock? And how are we trying to empower customer users within the organization with the solution that we're building up? So that's your first level of discovery. It's much more high level. It's really driven on the business outcomes, business use cases, overall strategy, alignment across organization, how people sort of interact within different departments. It's really a big piece of work that needs to happen. And it goes potentially through the series of different workshops, readouts, readbacks, making up some sort of high-level solution drafts and so forth. And these are the different areas that you have to focus. They're effectively outlined later down the track that you're going to start bringing up and saying, well, when we get to that technology piece, because remember we talk about outcomes first, so we identify these use cases and we start looking into technology alignment. That's when you start looking into these different functional domains. So we're going to build the use case, understand what needs to be done. That's your first level discovery. And then you go up and do the actual functional sort of solution level discovery, where you start looking into, okay, we know scenarios that we're trying to deliver. We know the outcomes of what we're driving. how do we implement that? And when we start switching into the implementation design thinking or process, you start thinking about what are the stages of implementation that you have to go through. And in this case, the way I sort of categorize them is you look into starting from spinning up the org itself, so provisioning the functionality of the platform and ensuring that the infrastructure behind the scenes is sort of stood up. And then you go on up through very clearly defined phases. So you go with anything to do with bringing data into the platform. That's your data ingestion. You get varieties of different sources. They have different structure, different I guess different level of quality. They could be complete, could be incomplete, could be clean, could be anything, could be damaged and whatnot. So it's all about bringing the data into the platform. That's the very first key phase of any implementation that you're going to have to go through. Once the data makes it into the platform, we look into harmonizing that, which is the process really of mapping the data schemas of the inbound data into the standardized data model within the product. So we refer to that as a customer 360 data model. And the reason why we have that is to allow us almost translate, if you will, different data sources, different schemas, different sources of origin into same common narrative around the data attributes for the end user to consume. So when you go into the platform and you see that we've got anything that comes in, it maps out into a one standard common terminology. And then when you go into consuming and using the data, you're effectively working with pretty much the exact same dictionary from customer to customer, from implementation to implementation. Again, this is not a given, because you can extend that standard library of attributes, standard library of objects, and enrich the data model with something that is completely unique and is required and relevant for your specific given implementation. So once we get the data harmonization done, it's now sitting in the platform. Fantastic. But with any other data sources, or with varieties of system, will most likely have duplicates or different representation of the same individual. So me as Vlad could exist in 5 different systems with maybe 15 different profile records, not even attributes. Why is that? Take as an example marketing dataset. So if you think about Marketing Cloud on its own, we've got subscribers with email addresses, with phone numbers, with mobile identifiers, and we can communicate with them. So what happens if I specifically have 3 different email addresses and 2 mobile phones? Ultimately, you're going to end up with having most likely 5 profiles or subscribers or contacts in Marketing Cloud for me. And when you bring them into the Data Cloud, the challenge is still the same. You still have 5 entries for the exact same person. It doesn't matter if the attributes will be harmonized and we're going to get them translated into the same common terminology. We're still going to end up with having 5 different records. And that's where that next phase comes in, that unification process. And we refer to that as identity resolution within the platform, meaning that we start looking into what are the different attributes that exhibit the relevance between different profile records to say that this is one and the same person. So for example, if I use my first name, last name, and email address, most likely if they all match, that's going to be the same person. Glad. If the email addresses are different, but first name and last name are the same, what about mobile numbers? What about device identifiers? What about any other different attributes that I can mix and match to try and figure out that it's the same person, just represented across 5 different records effectively? And that's when the process sort of kicks in. When it does the processing based on the rules that we define, we might do some fuzzy matching, we can do some really governed and strict matching, but ultimately we end up with unified profile and unified individual representation within the system. And from that point onwards, that's where kind of fun begins, because now, unlike any other vendors, we start looking into how do we activate and act on the data that we have in the platform. Your very first kind of touch point, or the very first functional area, would be segmentation, where you start slicing and dicing and investigating your audience. You build up all the data streams, you bring up the data into the platform, you unify that, harmonize it, unified it, and now you just want to analyze it. You're almost going up into defining, like, how many people I have that sort of fit into that particular criteria. Maybe I want to do the marketing campaign. Maybe I want to send them to commerce platform so I can start targeting them as they go through the website? What about experimenting with them and maybe potentially exposing some of this information into sales and service products and experiences? So that can be done. And then activation itself is really taking the data, taking the audiences and segments and publishing them into different channels. And that's where we sort of extending and expanding the product as we go along, but it's effectively the key functional things. Few things that are missing here would be, from the setup itself, when you're done provisioning, you look into administration. That's something that you would do to maintain and look after the instance. But practically, this is, I think that's going to be very much similar from one org to another, but that's something that's worthwhile adding into that list, I guess, as another functional area. Now, when you look at that flow, when you think about these are the different steps that you have to go in order to configure and define the solution, how would you approach the discovery? And interesting thing here is we really thought about that for a while. We analyzed some of the initial implementation that we've done, and this phrase that begin with the end in mind is really applicable in your discovery and design, both processes as you go along. Once you establish the use cases, once you identify what we're trying to achieve, what are we trying to deliver, why we're doing these different things, you start going through the functional area, but in the reverse order. And you're kind of looking into say, well, if we need to deliver ability to segment out certain individuals, what are the different attributes that we need to be using in order to define them in the platform? And you start navigating through the data model. Once the data model is identified more or less what you're going to be using, you start building steps towards what data sources will provide the information in order for me to be able to use these different models and attributes. And how do I recognize individuals? So you're kind of working in the reverse order in order to achieve that end vision that you started with. And kind of going back into a little bit of what are these different use cases that you might potentially think through and plan for from the discovery and I guess design standpoint of view. And we categorize them into 4 sections or 4 categories. Starting with unification and harmonization, which is really one of the most common reasons for bringing up the data cloud into the solution, because essentially what you want to do is achieve ability to recognize individuals within the database, at the individual human level. You're not necessarily talking about, a bunch of different records or profiles or representations of subscribers and contact. It's really people that we want to try to identify. We're looking into ability to democratize insights. We want to try to build up some notion within the data cloud itself, using features like calculated insights, where we using the data that we've got from different source systems and building up a bit of analysis and derived attributes in order to establish some certain patterns and act on them, which takes me to the next level. It's really about expanding the engagement. We're looking into segmenting the audiences. We're looking into activating these audiences, meaning that we want to start reaching out to people and engage with them across various channels. If you want to activate into Marketing Cloud, if you want to activate into the Commerce Cloud, as I said before, if you want to publish the segment into any other systems, through file-based integration or APIs, like there's varieties of different things that we can look into. And then ultimately you look into operational efficiency, because it is really important to be able to empower customers to be going up into the markets faster. We want them to be able to connect more data. We want them to be able to use it faster and doing as little, transformation, custom warehouse solutions and so forth as possible. So these are the key kind of buckets, if you will, to categorize your, different reasons for investing into solution. And as you go up through the discovery, these are the important elements that you want to identify. So the very, very first thing is, even if you are working on implementation discovery, you still need to understand what are we trying to drive. And effectively, these are the different value realization points for each of the pillars that you have to have in mind when you start thinking about discovery itself. And give you an example, one of the use cases that we have sort of more or less outlined and articulated, unified customer profile with engagement events. You can see there is a description where it fits in the life cycle and different benefits why the customers would potentially want to implement that. And as part of our library, when we start working with the customers, we do provide a series of these different use cases that we can share with our customers, we can share with our partners, in order for them to better understand where they fit in the journey, like what makes sense for them. Because there are different reasons and different business needs for achieving certain outcomes. And this way of expressing use cases that sort of draw that strategical business need and kind of bring it down to the technology, how we can get that done at the high level. These are the things that you should be beginning with. That's your starting point of discovery. Any discovery had to get to the point where you have a set of these different use cases. Could be 2, could be 3, could be 5, could be 1. As long as you know what you're trying to deliver, then this effectively unlocks your entire workflow for going up and building the discovery altogether. And as you can see, there could be a mix of different products. This one specifically talks about, again, identification of the data strategy first. Get to the point where you start auditing and identifying different level of data within different sources. You get to maturity assessment, again, to see if it's complete, if it's clean, if it's subject to any governance and rules and so forth, and then kind of follow from there, pretty much as we spoke about. Now, besides marketing, because one of the common things and common patterns, especially with the fact that, very much until recent time, like this day ago or so, we changed the name, but practically the way we sold Data Cloud was, positioned as a CDP product, and you only have it, packaged together with Marketing Cloud. Now, this is going to change, and we want to make sure that we, sharing the vision and thoughts around how that Data Cloud as a platform capability becomes more as a key strategic play or within the solution. And it applies across different domains within organizations. So if you think about, service implementation, if you think about sales connection, if you think about operational efficiencies, if you think about, business intelligence and analytics, there are different reasons why would you want to connect and combine these, different tools together, and what would you drive through these different implementations. Whether you're doing, like a good example, you talk about call center operators who use Sales Cloud Service Cloud, and the support agent should be able to see pretty much the, all the attributes, like truly entire customer profile within the single place within the Service Console. That's always been an inspiration for us, and it's something that Service Cloud does really well, delivering on that premise to say, bring up all the data points for the person to kind of be aware who is an individual on the other end that they are communicating with. And where Data Cloud comes in, it actually expands that flow to bring up data from varieties of different sources, going through that unification, exposing that, and all of a sudden you can see the history. Maybe you can see what products that individual that was just talking and chatting with that support agent was browsing through on the website 5 minutes ago before the call. We can start sort of circulating and connecting the dots between Data Cloud and maybe even Marketing Cloud personalization to drive recommendations. And again, you can see them in the web experience, mobile experiences, as well as within the Sales and Service Cloud products. Therefore, combination of all of these different tools kind of really yields up the results that span across not just single marketing domain, but much more encompassing across varieties of domains within the enterprise. And that's something, even though we sort of really heavily focusing on marketing bootcamp and marketing topic and marketing domain, keep in mind that this is not just marketing. It's really integral part of any organization and can unlock significantly more value. Okay, next point or topic rather is discovery framework. As you sort of keep in mind that workflow, starting from provisioning, getting the data into the platform, harmonizing that, unifying that, and then start working with that from the activation consumption standpoint of view, then we need to think through, well, okay, as I said, we've got a couple of use cases that we want to implement. How do we go up and discover? What do we need to focus on? How do we go through all of these different points? So the questions that you normally ask, and you kind of put together a checklist to discover some of the things potentially before these different workshops and meetings with the customer. For your customer yourself, if you're representing the customer, kind of think through these different stages to kind of go through and say, okay, we know what sort of flow we need to go through. Let's kind of talk about all of these different points. Again, I group them in the sequence as they go in through that implementation flow. But practically, this is something that you need to kind of almost take and fine tune for every single discovery session that or workshop that you're going to be facilitating or being part of. Kind of choose and focus on what do you want to drive today in that particular session. So the data collection comes up, in my opinion, one of the first one, and it will be one of the last ones. You'll have to come back to that. Usually as a solution, as an implementer, as a designer, you would think about what are the different systems that I need to be working with. You want to identify that early on. And then you're drawing that all of these different systems of data to go, are they all going to be empowering the use case that we're going to be delivering for you? Meaning that you've got system, like let's say an enterprise data warehouse, you've got marketing solution, you've got commerce solution, you might have a few other systems of records, ERP and anything else. And now you're coming up and saying, well, what is the use case that we're trying to do? Well, we're trying to, let's say, target the customers who made certain transactions over the period of time. Great. So you need to have customer profile, you need to know their transactional details, and maybe a few more attributes. So you derive it back and you go, well, you're telling me that there is 7 different systems that you have in the organization, but reality is your data that we're going to be consuming and using is only coming from 2 at most systems for right now. So do we really need to go through and collect and connect all of these data points, or do we focus on what matters now and effectively plug those that do make sense? Now, interesting element here is to play, when you start looking into these different use cases and asking these different questions, is to say, well, straightforward thinking is, you're talking about transactions, therefore it's a commerce product that needs to bring up transactions. What if there's additional data points that's sitting in the data warehouse? What if there is additional data point that sits in the marketing product? Like, you kind of still need to discover all of that. You need to identify what are these different things, and then you start building on top of that and drawing the parallel to say what makes sense to connect into the data model, so we can, empower and activate and use all of the information within the data cloud platform as we go on. So storage, important. You can look into what it is today, where it's coming from, how it's stored, and what are the different access pathways. Is it real time? Is it not real time? Do you think about quality? Do you think about completeness of data and so forth? So kind of look into that. You look into what are the reasons for capturing and storing some of that information, and then what relates to individual profiles. So what data do you have about people versus what represents transactional and auxiliary data sets? If it's appointments to see a financial advisor, or if it's an application for a loan, if it's a car purchase, and anything else. Like, these are transactional data. They not necessarily talk about customer. They talk about actions and behaviors of the customer. And why is that important? Because we need to differentiate between different data categories within the platform when we bring it in. And then you look into what else is important. It could be the case that if you talk to marketing team versus you talk to commerce team versus you talk to service team, they might have different importance and significance of certain data attributes. Therefore, you kind of need to collate about, almost like a holistic profile picture around what makes sense across the entire organization to know about the person, about their behavior, about their engagement and communications and conversations with the brand. Now, okay, let's see, how do I move that forward? Yeah, something that's coming up. Hold on, let me just pause it for a second. I'm just not seeing why there is a highlight on the deck. That should be here. So let me come back for a second. All right. Data collection is good. So resume share. I think it's annotation on the screen. All right. Next one is profile unification. So remember, when the data comes in and we kind of talk about harmonization and stuff, we kind of discover as the data sources go along, you want to discover how the data needs to be related to each other. And to make it a bit clearer, hopefully, you've got one way of looking into that. Most of the data points will have some kind of identifier, subscriber key, contact key. Salesforce CRM will have contact ID, lead ID, account ID, opportunity ID. The other system will have plenty of other IDs. Now, when you're discovering, when you're going up through the framework and you're kind of talking about, like, what are we trying to identify within the customer data when we thinking about our design, when we're thinking about discovery, you think about what when it comes down to unification, to say what attributes, what elements will tell that certain data points are related to each other. So that's where you want to look into that. How do we talk about the customers? How do we identify them? Do we use email address as the identifier? Do we use first name, last name, and I don't know, phone number? Like what makes sense, and what would you like to use going forward? If you talk about the data with regards to mapping and when it looks up into, is there any other mapping between different systems? Because usually when we introduce data cloud into the custom enterprise stack, we see that there is significant, well, there is at least few other systems of records that we want to try to bring together for clients. Therefore, you're not necessarily just connecting the data points across Salesforce ecosystem, right? Talking like marketing and commerce and CRM and anything else. But we'll look around and we'll look outside of that loop or the circle, and we'll look at the enterprise level. Like what else do we need to bring and what else do we want to use? You talk about the identity, you talk about this ID and resolution. Usually you'd ask customers, or you ask yourself, like, what are the challenges that you see today? You know, because some customers will tell you, guess what? We've got enterprise data warehouse. We've got all the business rules encapsulated in that. We're all building up all our sort of workflows in order for data to come in, follow these sort of rules engine, and then come out on the back of it to say we know what the golden ID is, we know who the person is, and we can deduplicate, cleanse, and so forth. It is important, and it's great if it works, because we can then straightforward bring it in and connect and plug in and use that ID as effectively a source of identification. Now, the question would be is there something else that you'd want to change? And it's difficult today, because within the data cloud, within the identity resolution, the framework is quite easy. It is configurable for the user interface, as opposite to building up, I don't know, some code and it being complicated. So you can kind of like augment that and try to experiment. You know, maybe you can do identity resolution using your identifier as a starting point, and then you take your database of people and start looking into, say, well, what if we change the rules a little bit? How would it differ? And we do provide the ability to do that. So you can actually see the result of running two separate rule sets side by side, to kind of almost like experiment, right? To see what makes more sense going forward. And then when you look at the other points, is to say, well, how do we integrate, you know, second and third party data sources that kind of potentially drive the unification? Again, we shifting in the world where third party information is not reliable and we don't necessarily want to use it. But there are scenarios that potentially that still might be the case, and you'd want to talk about that, and therefore you'll have to think through and kind of talk about that. Like, is it applicable? Is there a use case for that within the current sort of customer flow? Okay, next. So what do we have next? Let's see. Segmentation. So let me just, thank you for resetting that. So from segmentation standpoint of view, the data is in the platform, and the next sort of logical step is like we would want to use that. So we want to start operating with that. And I find that segmentation is almost the first starting point, you know, once you identify the data sources, but the segmentation is kind of ultimately drives into, if you pure play looking into data client being just building up customer profiles and nothing else, that's one use case. And it's very clear and it's very like straightforward in terms of thinking through it and designing it and building it and discovering for it. Because you kind of really working through my data sources, the details of unification, so combining and merging it together and sort of recognizing people behind them, and then it sort of sits as a provided unified data set of unified individuals. Now, if you do want to put it into action, you want to start working with the library attributes. And that's where the beauty of the standard data model comes in, with some extensions and augmentations. Because now, as a end user of the platform, you go up into the tool, and I'll happily show you later on, or either today or the next session, how it sort of looks like. But basically, you go up into library of attributes, and you're dragging them on the canvas and defining criteria. It's drag and drop, it's user-friendly, it's kind of fun, and it builds up the target data point for you right there in front of you. So once you publish the segment, once you save it and calculate, it actually tells you how many people fit into that criteria that you just defined. So that's where you're building it out. Now, from the discovery, you ask customers, like, what are they missing today? How do they do segmentation today? How do they approach that? Are there any difficulties? Is there any challenge with getting the data in? Is there any challenge with consuming? Do they have to write, like Marketing Cloud, for example? Quite often you'll find that you need to write some SQL. And for a good number of users, it's still a challenge. Yes, we've got different tools that allow you to do some drag and drop segmentation. Yes, you can construct the data model with Marketing Cloud in such a way that it's easy to consume through drag and drop segmentation. But still, imagine if you need to expand your footprint of data from just marketing and maybe Salesforce CRM to few others. And then all of a sudden that whole drag and drop becomes a huge complexity. It's not that easy to achieve. And that's where the data cloud essentially brings up that completely new capability to do that and ease of doing that. Again, from the segmentation standpoint of view, you draw a parallel to the use cases. So if you discovered that one of the use cases would be to build up audience segments, you want to start diving into what specifics would the customer need, would the end user need in order to build that segment. Do you need to think about the data that needs to be bucketed in a certain dimensions? Like how would that exploratory cube of attribute look like in order for an end user to use it in the easy, user-friendly, and most efficient way? And that's where segmentation has to kind of come into play. How does it relate to the to the use cases that we're building? So if you want to target these individuals who do in fact made certain amount of transactions with a total amount of X, Y, and Z over the period of time, you kind of need to look back into, do we have these attributes? Do we have them available in the standard data model, or do we need to customize that? If we identify that, now where do we source them? What data source that we've just discovered and talked about will bring up these attributes into play? Where do we source them from, and so forth? So it sort of all draws from each other. And then prediction. So prediction itself is an interesting point, and I kind of tend to look into that. One of the ways to bring up the data into data cloud is, for example, Marketing Cloud, where you've got these prediction scores. So we allow for native integration, an easy way to bring that prediction score from marketing into data cloud. If you want to build up your custom data models, the way the product sort of evolves and transitions now is to allow to bring completely outside, like I think it was Amazon SageMaker that effectively you want to look into, say we want to build some kind of modeling outside of Salesforce ecosystem per se. We still want to use the same tools. Now we want to allow our customers to bring and integrate these data points so they can embed them again into the common data model and use them within segmentation, activation, any other means within the platform. But it is important to talk about that. Maybe there could be a place for building up some insights within the platform. So using the data that we bring, combining maybe marketing with commerce, with service, like 3 different data sources, and building the data points of few of them that will consolidate these 3 sources and identify the trend of how many cases are have been raised for specific product lines, how many customers would be purchasing particular transaction and open less than 5 cases altogether from the return or support or any other perspective. So you can get to the point where some of these elements you can use to build up some modeling within the tool itself, within the data cloud, or you can bring up any sources, and that's where out of the box models today that customers might be using. Activation itself is one of the last points that you want to really focus on. Is once you've got the segments done, or if you don't have the segments, because that's the other way of thinking about that, is the data can bring that reach data cloud in different ways and different methods, and we'll talk about that through other sessions in the series. But what is important to understand is you might get a real-time data feed, or you might have a scheduled, like more sort of traditional batch data feed coming in. But sometimes on these real-time specifically use cases, you might want to trigger some action. You maybe want to create a case in Salesforce CRM, or create a task, or update a record of the contact or account or something like that. You can do that. Or maybe you want to send the customer into Marketing Cloud and like Journey or Message, or you want to look into combining some of these elements and then defining the segment that is then sent to either Marketing Cloud or Commerce Cloud or other systems, or maybe advertising platform, like varieties of means. But activation is all about that. It's about once the data reaches the platform, at some point in time, I want to do something about that data, whether it's based on the segment, whether it's based on the actual payload of the original data coming in, doesn't really matter. All I want to do is think through what does it tell me, and then so I can orchestrate and kind of almost hand over the challenge of saying, well, here's the customer who just went through the website and clicked on that specific interactive widget, and I want to be able to inform our salesperson that most likely we need to talk to that individual. So how do I orchestrate all of that? Get the data in, you kind of channel it through, you create an action, and then that action sort of triggers up the task creation in Salesforce CRM. Fantastic. The other option could be is we've got people coming up, exploring the website. Now we want to advertise to these individuals. So you create a segment, publish that segment, and that segment goes up into the either advertising audience, or you can channel them to Marketing Cloud, and you can use Advertising Studio to reach out to them. So again, varieties of different options. The whole idea is about what do we need to do? Is there something that you will be doing with the data, and what is it for your specific use case? Again, goes back to the use cases. If the activation and enrichment of engagement is part of the sort of strategical goal and vision and the use case library that you're implementing for the customer, then here we go. That's exactly what you need to talk through. Tell us, where do we need to send? What channels are you focusing on? Where do you want the personalization to take place? Because again, we can take the segment of the audience and publish it into the Marketing Cloud personalization. So then next time when people start interacting with digital properties, we can actually, start targeting them through dedicated campaigns, because we know that segment came up through Data Cloud, and we know that it was selected for a reason. Therefore, we can construct a specific campaign targeting these particular individuals. So there's different ways of kind of drawing that. Where does it go? Last but not least, analytics. Again, this is business intelligence. This is understanding your audience. This is understanding people, how they engage, how they talk. But at the same time, that's looking after the data. How many people that exhibit certain attributes? What's the spend? What's the deduplication rate? What's the data for? The great thing about the analytics, specifically within the Salesforce, at least, ecosystem, right? We've got native connectors that allow us to expose the data from Data Cloud into the Tableau, where you can immediately work with the entire data set. You can start, visualizing that. You can start mining it. You can start thinking about what works, what doesn't. So many different ways that you can look into achieving. But for customers, what we found is it's quite often like with any other reports, you kind of need to ask them what is important for them. So it's great that we've got all of these different tools. They may or may not have a license for it, but practically you'd want to understand what are their needs, what are they trying to measure, what they're trying to understand and mine. So are they looking for a tool where they want to be able, or rather not the tool, but are they looking for an ability to better understand their audiences and find patterns to build up certain segments? Or are they looking for an opportunity to improve something that they have today, but it's incomplete? Maybe there's missing data points. And again, it could be that they've got already systems in place and all they need is the data that sits within the Data Cloud that then they can need to plug back into their analytical system. So thinking about all of these different scenarios, effectively just kind of going like, okay, what do we need to measure? How do you want to see it? How do you want to work with that? Does it need to be real time, not real time? So you kind of talk about these different scenarios and use cases, and then effectively building off that. The reason for kind of narrowing on that specific area is you want to think about, what can be achieved or what should be achieved through activation, what can be achieved and should be achieved through integration with things like Tableau or through MuleSoft or third-party systems, because we can publish the data, we can retrieve data through API. So different ways of consuming and extracting information from Data Cloud. But one of the things today is it's not necessarily a new data warehouse that we're building. And quite often these particular requirements around analytics, they might assume that the Data Cloud itself is yet another data warehouse where you just have bucket load of data and you can just visualize and slice and dice it and so forth, which is not always the case. But we do have, tactical information around the metadata of the data itself, like the data streams, the configuration of the identity resolution and stuff, and you can easily visualize and surface that in the Salesforce CRM through analytics, because that's part of it. If you need to get a bit deeper into the data itself, here's your pathway to Tableau. If you need to use third-party tools, you can consider MuleSoft, you can consider other tools, through API, through other means, or maybe you're just interested to understand and figure out the segments and kind of, as I said, mine them a bit more. So you can publish those and use them as a source to bring into the other systems to kind of do a bit of analysis. So anything that sort of fits into that profile is just really about how do you want to analyze and what do you need to do and what do you need to see. Kind of goes back to these different data points. All right. The only other thing that I didn't really spoke about here, and that's probably one of the misses that I just realized too late, was talking about administrative sections or portion rather of the tool, because more and more things are sort of coming up into data cloud becoming so centric within the organization data lifecycle, and it contains a lot of data that comes in that's being processed and so forth. You also need to think about what administrative things that needs to happen within the platform. So part of discovery could be are there specific data sources that are super critical to be processed on a daily basis, for example? What happens if one of the data sources is not being refreshed, or doesn't have an updated data coming in? Do we need to alert someone? Do we need to inform something? Do we need to just make a note of that? So there's quite a few of these little sort of things that you need to go through and understand a bit better before you kind of continue with the actual implementation as well, because few things are native to the platform. Others might require some development that you need to build up around it. We've got quite a lot of events publishing through Salesforce. So natively within the flow, you can connect to an event. For example, a segment has been published or identity resolution job has completed, and then you can analyze the result and kind of think through, does it mean whatever the outcome is, was there an error, was there a wrong number or something else that sort of triggers up a potential for and then a human being to be involved and investigate further, whether it's an admin, whether it's a manager, or whoever is the owner of the solution in the end. So these are the extra elements that you'd want to kind of think through and kind of pile into the discovery framework to say okay, what administrative tasks that we need to be able to support? What would you like to see? And if you're doing it for customers, quite often they would probably expect you to tell them what they should be doing, how they should be monitoring. And from your perspective, it's just understanding the critical component. What happens if the segment on the refresh comes up with 0 people in it? Is that okay? Or is it not? As I said, if the data stream is not being refreshed for 48 hours, how much of a problem it is. For some customers, it might be okay because that's just the natural velocity of their data, and that's how it moves, and that's how it's being generated by other systems. For others, it could actually mean a whole lot of trouble, and therefore they would want to start an investigation. They would want people to jump in and figure out what's actually happening. So that's something definitely to look for. And then as an administrator, no doubt you'd want to think through, what reports and dashboards you'd like to see, almost like when you jump into the tool, when you go up into the homepage and you go oh, I'd like to see how many people were or how many records were in a particular dark stream, 24 hours ago versus now, different things to think through. But again, something to discover as well. Okay, questions and discussions. Do we have any questions? I'm assuming there'll be some. Let me see if I can figure some out.
No, I think unfortunately we don't have any questions, Vlad. So Vlad, can you showcase if anything from an implementation perspective, do we need to consider anything that we start with the Salesforce data platform? How many weeks we require to be available for implementing this, or any best practices for?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, there is that sort of so let me put it this way. We initially built up a suggestion for what the MVP implementation might look like, and we quickly realized that MVP means different things for different people, different customers. And why is that? So for some individuals where implementation is about harmonizing and unifying data, their effectively end of implementation is when the data reaches the platform, it plugs into the data model, and then they can harmonize it and unify it. So that's where it's sort of their stage. And once you get through unification, they effectively say, okay, great, now I can run some segmentation queries, but that's fine. We don't need any specific outcomes. That's one point of view. On the other side, if you look into the activation, that whole process could be much, much longer. Why? Because you get to the point of bringing the data in, you go through all the stages, all the processes, you get to the segment, you activate the segment, you publish it into the target destination, you start exploring that, and you discover some challenges. Practically, if you think about overall, the ratio between consultancy and implementation, based on pretty much almost a year and a half of observation for different projects through our internal services teams and consulting partners, it's like 60 to 40 in terms of 60% of the time you'd be consulting and 40% of the time you'd be implementing. It could skew to 70-30. What consultancy means in that context? Consultancy means that you have to go and do discovery, that you have to go up and do data audit. You have to go up and do design of the data model. You have to think through the mappings. You have to think through, so you're kind of designing the whole flow. Because if you think about most of the implementation flow within the platform, when you're actually doing things, if you're following instructions, you can stand up the solution pretty quick, assuming that you have data sources ready to go from the customer side or from the source systems, I should rather say. So you've got all the credentials, tools, and things that you need to in order to connect to different sources, and then you've got the sort of pre-designed data model and written out use cases for segments, for activation and stuff. So that configuration could last 2 weeks, could last 3 weeks, could sometimes last 1 week. If the customer is only doing initial phase, they might be doing evaluation, they might be bringing like Marketing Cloud and Salesforce CRM together. Like you can potentially configure it within 1 week because it gets that easy. The challenge would be though is designing and defining what needs to be configured. That's where you can spend a couple of months easily, because you'll have to run few workshops. Discovery itself is usually done through more than one workshop, and you would have to be prepared if you're a customer to participate. If you're consulting, if you're implementing, then you'll have to be prepared to go back and ask questions and clarify, and can kind of almost break it down into different sections, because there are specific points where you want maybe IT teams to be involved. There'll be other sections where you'd want end users, whether it's a marketing team, commerce team, I don't know, any other users, the end users of the platform. So you'll have to talk to them. You'll have to figure out how that whole discussion layer aligns towards customer overall strategy, and does it drive the business outcomes and so forth. So that connection between the business needs, translation into sort of semi-functional, functional, semi-technical requirements in terms of what outcomes we're driving, and then building and defining that actual design of the solution through discovery, through design process itself. You'll have to see, think, draw, map. You'll build up few spreadsheets and connect the data, try to see if it makes sense, create the test data set and whatnot, test it out. So all of that will take some time, and that time is often hard to just put a finger and say, okay, this is what it is. I'd roughly say the very simple implementation can last from 8 weeks to 12 weeks, and that could be end to end, from like implementation, discovery, design, configuration, testing, and then sort of go live and handover procedure. That could easily fit into somewhere between, as I said, 8 to 12 weeks. But again, it's very out of context. It really would depend on how many data sources the customer would want to bring, how many use cases they would love to be implemented, and what are they? Are they just simple sort of, I want to define a segment and that really tells me that the platform is good to go? Or do they actually want to see it towards the very end? So engagement wise, like publish it into the commerce platform and see the segment and add it into the commerce and then start retargeting people, or publish into marketing, or consume the data within Sales and Service Cloud. Because there could be things like customization that need to be done in order to expose certain information about customers in the unique ways, through Lightning Web Components or any other means. So plenty of different options. And I know, I'm sorry, long-winded answer.
I think that derives the entire explanation, Vlad. Thank you so much. So there's one more question from the audience. Can we capture data from third-party source in real time?
Third-party source in real time. Yes, we've got a few ways of doing that. So one is, if you're looking into sort of web and mobile. We've got SDKs that you can use in order to collect the data in real time. If you're looking into completely third-party systems, you'd be looking into utilizing an API. We've got batch and real-time APIs for the platform where you can publish the data, and it's really going to be, what is the other end of the solution and how it's going to look like. From our side, it's very well documented. You can explore it, you can research it, and you can implement it without any constraints. The third option to consider would be MuleSoft, because MuleSoft provides you an extra layer on top of our API. So you can potentially find a faster way to implement if you're considering MuleSoft being part of the play. So that way you can connect MuleSoft to Data Cloud and then connect to whatever is the third-party system.
Yep.
Totally doable.
Thanks, Vlad. Any other questions, team? So I have one question, Vlad, especially so this data cloud, do we really require a marketing cloud to be onboarded if anyone using a data cloud?
To be onboarded? No, not anymore. So in the past, it kind of goes back to that whole naming, right? Why did we have different names? Why did we change it and so forth?
Yes.
So when we started, the whole evolution of the product started with the fact that we were kind of stepping into the game of CDP or customer data platforms. More strategically, I guess our product team had a vision to kind of span beyond CDP in a sense of beyond marketing use cases. But the initial sort of testing ground for us was marketing. And for marketing, the data, it really kind of goes into the customer data platform. We kind of reflected that in the way that we package our sort of products and services. And in essence, you were not able to purchase CDP even as a platform. So it was always packaged together with Marketing Cloud, and therefore it became de facto a marketing tool. That recent name change came up into an attempt for us to change and break through that perception, because we're really now at the time where the data cloud itself becomes a fabric of data for an enterprise, and it doesn't really need to be tied up to one single domain or one specific product. It's kind of beyond that. It's really is a foundational platform services layer. It provides ability to connect the data and then expose it for the enterprise in any experience, whether it's a service experience, marketing experience, HR experience, anything. If you're engaging with customers, if you're analyzing that, if you're building up some automation and processes around it, like it just almost like a data as a service provider per se, like not necessarily that, but like that's the easy way for me to kind of explain this. Just sits up and provides that foundational service alike to AI and ML through Einstein, or security through our platform services. So there's plenty of these different things that sort of come into that, and now we changing the way we sell it, meaning that customers will be able to purchase the data cloud as a part of like platform vision, and then they can choose and pick to say, if we do need marketing, bring up the marketing. So you'll get an extra license, you'll get some extra features, and the whole packaging of consumption service is going to be a little bit different. If you're pure play looking into expansion of analytical use cases, then you've got the data cloud with Tableau that sort of provides that link together. And going forward, the idea for us is we want to really treat the data cloud as being, first party resident for the platform services, meaning that you've got your own license set for it and consumption model for it. And then if you need to expand it into any domain, one or more than one, it doesn't really matter. So if the domain implies that you need an extra features, then absolutely. And an example of the extra feature could be that activation. Like if you say plan the use case for the data with service specifically, or like CRM like use cases versus marketing use cases. In marketing, the flow is very well defined through bring the data in, go make it smart, and then publish it out. So you can bring it back to marketing for taking an action and sort of connecting with marketing flow. Now, from service perspective or sales perspective, we want to surface up data points, but we're not activating segments per se. So that entire activation has a very different meaning. And therefore, if you want to purchase the data cloud, that's fine, you got it. But if you want to look into marketing flow, potentially an extra license will need to be required. That's the way it's going to go forward. And really that empowers us to kind of say, well, it's no longer just marketing use case. It's no longer you need marketing cloud in order to implement or in order to learn or in order to drive it. It's going to become standalone feature, like as I said, first-party resident within the platform functionality.
Got it. And I think that sounds really good. Now I also understand completely because now the recent data platform is not anymore for the marketers, but it also for a DWH team or the data specialist, or if you want to unify the profile from the first party, from the sales, our platform. So I think it can be leveraging very heavily as well. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
One last question, Vlad, like what's the overlap with CRM analytics? So first of all, Tableau CRM. So is there any overlap between CRM analytics versus Data Cloud?
Yeah, very good question. I love them, but absolutely none. To be honest, not at all. I guess the flow might look similar, but the way we're consuming the data, the way we're working with it, and the way we're building the modeling and so forth, I'm thinking of any analytic tool comes next, and it's part of like once we brought the data together and made it smart or look like in a smart way, we can kind of almost QA and verify that with analytical tools. So analytics is more understanding it, mining through it, going through that, identifying anomalies, visualizing it, like using for the business context. You're driving business decisions and you're really empowering other users with the insights. Now, with the data cloud itself, it's really the orchestration of the data lifecycle, because you bring it in, you kind of consolidate it, you refine that, you transform it a bit maybe, you harmonize it, then you go through unification. It's really stages that the data has to go through. The analytics is not playing any role within that layer because it's just not the place. You almost, think of that as cooking. The process of cooking, right? That you've got the chef who's sort of working on the kitchen and preparing the meal for you, and then the customer, who's consuming that meal is given to be the one like analytical platform where they take the ready-made product and then they consume it. So to me, that's the analogy between what the data cloud or CDP will do, because it focuses on preparation and sort of building up the process, while the analytics is going to be end consumption. You can integrate them back, so there could be the kind of like a look back or cycle back, where you take the analytical insights and you bring them in. But again, you can't plug analytics in that sense to kind of make sense of the data. It's different scale. And I guess the only other way to say is just some of the highlights that we do talk from the product perspective. The data cloud was built for high scale, like true sense high scale data volumes. We wanted to make sure that it scales up to petabytes of data. It's very different from anything that we've done so far within the CRM or even marketing cloud space. I always said that marketing cloud has an enormous ability for storing the data and kind of putting it into action. But again, comparing to data cloud, we're quite far apart. And it's by design. We sort of look into all the tools we have within the Salesforce systems, within all the portfolio of the products. And we saw that this is a need for our customers to react and respond to the consistently growing volume of data in the modern days, and especially real-time volumes of data. So none of these tools would be able to ingest, digest, and process and do anything at that volume and at that scale. And therefore, it's absolutely two different, even functional capabilities, besides the business use cases.
All right, I think that sounds really great, Vlad. So my last question would be, so can we expect any functionality change, or can we see any more features to be added into the new data cloud, or can we expect any big changes coming up with the functionality of the existing CDP versus data cloud?
All right, so maybe let me answer that in a slightly different way, and I'll reframe the question to say, what's the difference between CDP today and the data cloud?
Yep.
And practically, so think about if I look at that, like technology-wise, the data cloud and CDP both have a set of services that are common across them. Now, we looked at the CDP is almost being one end product for a specific line of business, marketing specifically. And therefore, what it does, it takes a certain set, pretty much majority of our platform level services, and then adds a business layer on top of that, which is really like the activation workflow, if you think about that, like sending segments to Marketing Cloud and publishing them and activating them, or Commerce Cloud or something like that. So it's an extra package, but it's really full encompassing. It has all the same features around data ingestion, so real-time batch, schedule, all of that is supported. It has the exact same features within the platform in terms of modeling, so harmonizing, extending data model, unification, building up resolution engine and stuff. All of that is done, and it has all the features around activating it out. So you can access through API, you can publish segments, you can do whatever you want to do. It's a full build package. When we go back to, okay, well, marketing is big, it's great, but for every other use case, like even analytics, we don't need a certain subset of these features. And go, okay, that makes sense. Now, we took all the marketing, I guess, language, terminology, and application and kind of decouple it from the platform services. And these platform services became what we now know as a data cloud. So that's the core foundational services that are going to be applicable to any product, SKU, or license that you're going to purchase. Ultimately, it's about the data ingest, it's about the harmonization, it's about the unification, it's about activation. And they all come together across any offerings, and they're all going to be exactly the same in terms of feature function capabilities. So the only differences that you will start seeing now is when we look into packaging for marketing, there'll be few more features enabled because the license cost and the license package is slightly different. If you look into packaging for analytics, you will find that some of the functional services are not there because we didn't enable them. And to me, it's almost like if you look at the Service Cloud, there are few levels down licenses that you may or may not purchase. If you don't need integration with telephony, you wouldn't need that. So you're not necessarily using it, and therefore you don't want to pay for it. But if you do want the knowledge, like a knowledge base, or if you need a community for your customers, these are the almost like a microservices that you do want to be enabled within the license of the Service Cloud. So Data Cloud is going to come towards that angle where you have core foundational set of features that are going to be enabled in every license that we sell, but then depending on specific kind of business level use case, whether it's marketing, commerce, health cloud, financial services cloud, all of these will imply that certain extra functionalities will be enabled or disabled by default. But if you do need to buy them, if you do came to the point where a customer with, I guess, a service use case would still want to have an activation enabled, that's fine. They will just get an extra license and enable it. So the answer is there is no difference. There is no extra things that you would expect to see between the existing CDP and the data cloud. But what you would expect to see in terms of differences and changes is just natural evolution of the product forward. We bring in more feature functions with every release. So this release will bring up a few things. Next release will bring up a few more things. By the time we hit the Dreamforce, there'll be some extra cool stuff that's sort of being right now baked and so forth. So there are more functions, but customers who use CDP today and the customers who's going to start purchasing Data Cloud, they technically will not see any differences as long as they both are sort of for marketing use cases. As soon as they go into analytics and Tableau, then they're going to start seeing less, but not more.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Vlad. I think that's all from questions. I think there's one question where can Data Cloud be used to mapping other attributes than just the ones that concern individuals?
Other attributes. So let's put it this way. The data that you bring in can have variety of attributes, and even the same, like as I said, person can have, from Service Cloud to Sales Cloud to Marketing Cloud, maybe put it this way, CRM versus marketing versus commerce, 3 different set of attributes, and they could be completely different besides email, first name and last name and address. Now, when you bring them in, you map them all into a common understanding. So all 3 different sources represent a person. And the person is reflected through a standard object, individual, and it has first name, last name, email address, phone number, and 100 other attributes that are standard by definition. That's effectively our highly opinionated customer 360 data model. We looked at what makes sense. Similar, like you've got standard objects in Salesforce CRM. There's contact, there is campaign, there is lead, there is account, opportunity. But similar to CRM, you have an option to extend that. So if you find an attribute that is specific to your business use case and it doesn't exist within the standard model, you can just add another attribute. So we allow for that expansion, as well as create a net new object itself. So it could be, and I was thinking through like a use case of rental and booking for a bike sharing service, right? Like someone books the bicycle to rent, or someone rents it. Now you could look at booking and rental as a transactional level, two different objects. And most likely, if you store them in CRM, you'd have a booking and a rental, right? Two different things. Now, when you bring them into the data cloud, you could look at them as being transactions, and you can both of them map into the same thing, very much like you did with contact and customer and subscriber. Or you can actually say, no, for us contextually, the booking and the rental are two different things, and I want to have two separate items. And you create two custom objects within the data model, and you map them all out individually. So it all kind of works in the way you need to do. We do encourage customers to think about using as much standard library as they can, mainly because it eases up maintenance and it supports interoperability between different product lines and so forth. But at the same time, I mean, if you need to come up with a hybrid model, that's totally cool. And that's where you've got these third-party attributes, different types of attributes about people, their behaviors, their transactions and actions. You certainly can map it out.
Got it. I think that sounds good, Vlad. I think Sabar, probably you got your answer right. If not, just let me know so that.
I mean, the only other thing I can think of, because there's so it would be easier to kind of talk about that in the session when we start talking about the data ingestions, right? When we go maybe through the platform and show you some examples. But the data cloud today works on the premise that every data that you bring in, you have to categorize against three options. One of them is profile. So anything to do with attributes about people and individuals. Second is engagement. So it's really actions that people take. You know, it could be click, could be opening email, could be buying transaction, could be making an appointment, could be renting the car, whatever. All of these different things that they're actions that people take. And there's a third layer or third category, which is other, and that's about all other auxiliary data points. So example could be product catalog. It doesn't belong to person because it's not about people, and it doesn't belong to engagement because it's not about action, but it supplements the action. So you do want to say, I want to identify people in my database who looked on the website in the last 3 months and seen these particular product categories more than 3 times. So that's where you need that product category. And one way you can hook up the product category into transaction model, like into the object within the data model into transaction, or you can actually be a bit more extended and go, well, I'll save product as a product as an object, and then all other metadata about products could be category, subcategory, price, any other things that sort of make sense. And all of a sudden your segmentation criteria becomes richer because now you have more angles to work with. So that's where that third category comes in. And therefore, if your data kind of is between people, their behavior and action, and everything else that supplements them, that we've got 3 categories. So that way you can think of, like, if I'm bringing the data, can I map it? Most likely, from the functional standpoint of view, you either find the standard object or you build your own or you hybrid out the standard one. From the source perspective, you just need to figure out which particular type of data that fits in. Like, is it person? Is it behavior, action, and other? That's kind of all.
Yep. Thanks, Brad. I think that's all from today's session. Thank you so much for joining with us today. I know it's pretty late for you. It's almost 9:05 or 9:10. Thank you once again for sharing your valuable insights and taking your time as well. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks everyone for joining with us today. So tomorrow we have a session with Prashant, and he's giving a session about content builder, session 1. It's a marketing cloud content builder. He'll go dig deep into what is content and what kind of content is available, how to create all the content in marketing cloud. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.